hospitality industry here in New Orleans. I do want to remind you guys, at Barrel Proof from 1 to 3, right there on Magazine Street, you can see it on our website, there's information. There's a closing party for the New Orleans Bourbon Festival, so feel free to show up and have a couple of drinks. Thanks to Penelope for helping with those pours. And the main event here, the esteemed master distiller, Conor O'Driscoll from Heaven Hill. Please.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Good to see most of you. Actually, it's good to see all of you. It's good to see most of you again. That's what I meant to say. So this is very free form. I'll take questions as we go. I'm going to talk kind of about the history of Heaven Hill. We've got 3 exceptional pours. We got the Heaven Hill 7-year-old bottle and bond. Your middle pour is a William Heaven Hill 15-year-old, and then the one on the right is the first edition of the Heaven Hill Heritage Collection, age dated at 17 years old. We'll get to those in due course. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Conor O'Driscoll. Yes, I'm Irish. They put an Irishman in charge of the whiskey. Still trying to figure out if I'm living the dream or living the stereotype, but you know, it's working, right? I'm Heaven Hill's 7th master distiller, and I've been in the business just a little over 20 years. I started with Brown-Forman in Louisville at the Shively Distillery, coincidentally making a lot of whiskey for Heaven Hill post the famous fire of 1996. Worked there for 5 years, then went out to Woodford Reserve for 9 years. I commuted the hour each way for those 9 years. I figured I drove 300,000 miles to and from Woodford, but it's kind of labor of love. If you've ever been to Woodford ever at all, it's a gorgeous spot. I mean, it kind of defines Kentucky whiskey, Kentucky history. It's kind of a cool spot. I left there in 17 and joined Angel's Envy, and was there for about 18 months when Heaven Hill called to, Denny Potter had just announced he was leaving. He called and said, would I be interested in this job? And I said, I just made a big move. Just left Brown-Forman, joined Bacardi. I like it here, I'll pass. As soon as I hung up the phone, I was like, that's probably the wrong answer. And I went home and I told my wife, and she says, you fucking idiot, that was the wrong answer. And I quote. So luckily Denny called back, and here we all are. So I've been with Heaven Hill 5 years now, and honestly it's the best career move I could have made. Fantastic company. Started in 1935 by the 5 Shapiro brothers. The story is that during Prohibition, Earl Beam, cousin to Jim, or some distant cousin to Jim anyway, went down to Mexico and made whiskey there. As soon as Prohibition ended, he came back and looked for financial backers to start a new distillery in Bardstown. The Shapiras owned a chain of what were called junior department stores across central Kentucky. So they loaned him the princely sum of $20,000 to get started. And it turns out that Earl was a better distiller than he was businessman. So when he came back to ask for more money, the Shapiras said, listen, why don't we just own the company and you run it, you make the whiskey for us. And that started the company in 1935. The first product they brought out was called Heaven Hill Springs, and that wasn't until 1939. They waited full 4 years so they could bring out a bottle and bond product. It was a commitment to quality and transparency and just legitimacy in the business, and that's part of our DNA, and as I think you'll see from our lineup today, that hasn't changed. That's still our guiding light, our North Star. We are still fully owned and operated by the Shapira family. Max Shapira is the son of one of the 5 brothers. He is our executive chairman. His daughter Kate and her husband Alan are our co-presidents, and they run the show. And as the saying goes, you don't say no to the co-po. But they're great to work for. They're really good to work for. And I'll talk a little bit about what it's like to work for an independently owned and operated company, how agile you can be, how quickly you can make big decisions and kind of stay one step ahead of the competition. But let's talk a little bit about our first pour this morning. So this is, people always ask me, what's my favorite product in our extensive lineup? And I used to say, right off the bat, Pikesville Rye. It's still right up there, but this is probably the one I'm most proud of and that I really enjoy talking about and drinking, and just, you know, it's, for a start, it's a gorgeous bottle. The label looks cool. But when we get into what's on the label, so right at the very top there, Bottle and Bond. This is one of our newest releases. We brought this out in 2019. So however many years that is after 1939, was that 80 years, something like that? After the company was founded, we're still bringing out Bottle and Bond. This thing with Bottle and Bond, so if you're not familiar with it, the Bottle and Bond Act was passed in 1897, and it was a guarantee of whiskey quality. At the time, there was no FDA, there were no rules and regulations defining what you should or should not put in a bottle of whiskey. So there were rectifiers who were concocting God knows what. And, you know, you hear stories that they would go to the saloons and get the spittoons and pour them into the bucket of whatever they were mixing up to give it some good whiskey color, you know? So people were dying, people were getting sick, and the government said we got to do something about this, so they passed the Bottle and Bond Act that defined that the whiskey had to be made by a single producer in a single distilling season, so the first half and the second half of the year. You had to put on the label who made it and who bottled it. You could put nothing in the bottle but whiskey and water to cut it to exactly 100 proof, and it had to be at least 4 years old. So if you were a consumer in 1897, you knew you could go and buy a bottle of whiskey that was Bottle and Bond, and you were guaranteed quality. So cut to 1935, 38 years after that a law was passed, and Heaven Hill start, and they want to have that mark of quality. And again, we still do it. If you think about it, there's something like, when I got in this business, there were 10 distilleries in Kentucky and 2 outside of Kentucky. Does anyone know how many distilleries there are in the US right now? Hint, there's 100 in Kentucky. 2,600. Someone heard us say it yesterday. At least they're paying attention, thank you. So 2,600, so let's say they've got, you know, what, 4 products each. Let's say 10,000 different whiskey products out there. In all of those, there are maybe 100 that are Bottle and Bond. In any one market, there might be 20. Heaven Hill have somewhere between 12, 13 different bonded products. So if you're looking for something rare, something, you know, everyone wants the rarest thing. What's the rarest thing you got? Well, we got Bottle and Bond. There are, again, 100 out of 10,000, and in any one market, there might be 20 or 30. So they're rare. We just happen to have rare stuff available every day. So let's take a little sip and see what we think about it. I know what I think about it. Damn, I never get tired of drinking that. So, obviously a big, rich, bold whiskey. All the components that you would expect from a well-crafted bourbon. Again, it's 100 proof. To me, it's super smooth, and I didn't hear anyone cough or choke, so that's good. But a long, rich, lingering finish. One thing I like to point out, like when you're tasting whiskey, the first rule of tasting whiskey is, are you enjoying what you're drinking? And the second rule is, there is no second rule. Are you enjoying what you're drinking? That's all there is to it, right? Thank you. Now, if you can pick out the tobacco or the mint or the whatever it might be, it's great. Good, and it's really fun to do, and it's a learned skill. The hardest thing for me is to put the adjective to what exactly I'm tasting. But drinking it and enjoying it, that's why we make this stuff. And I think we've done a fine job here. So at the Burnham Distillery in Louisville, it's 17th and Breckenridge. It's the largest single-site bourbon distillery in the world. We make enough whiskey every day to fill 1,500 barrels. Last year, calendar 23, we made over 441,000 barrels of whiskey. It's just a lot. We mill and mash 1.1 million pounds of grain every single day. We have 17 fermenters. They're 124,000 gallons each, and a day's production is to fill 4 of those, and obviously then we have to distill out 4 of those, and that becomes 101,000 proof gallons of whiskey that fills 1,500 barrels. Quite apart from the size of the distillery, we used to, this line was like, we mash 5 unique styles of American whiskey. Well, Thursday, what day is today? Is today Saturday? Today's Saturday, yeah, Thursday. Thursday we distilled a 95% rye for the first time, and as I was going down through the whiskeys we'd made, I realized that was the 11th different mash bill that we have made at Bernheim in the last 12 months. So the 5 usual ones are what we call HH Reg, Heaven Hill Regular, 78% corn, 10% rye, 12% malted barley. We make OFD, Old Fitz distillate. That's, instead of 10% rye, it's got 20% wheat. We make rye whiskey, wheat whiskey, and corn whiskey. Those are the 5 regulars. We have 3 grain to glass expressions, which will, the first products from those will be coming out this summer. We did an American single malt last summer. That will be another 6 or 7 years. And then we own Widow Jane, and we made their Baby Jane distillate, which is an 80% heirloom corn, 10% malted rye, 10% malted barley, and then the 95% rye. So 11 mash bills in 1 year in an organization that big, it's pretty cool. But everything we're going to drink today is HH Reg. It's about 85 or 90% of what we make. And if you notice in that whole list of stuff I just rattled off, I didn't mention a single brand. We don't make brands at the distillery, we make styles of whiskey. And the other thing I need to point out is we craft on a very large scale. You hear a lot of people talk about craft distilleries, and craft has become synonymous with size. So the smaller you are, the craftier you are. Well, I think as we'll taste through this flight today, I think you'll find that we do craft. We just do it on a huge scale. Again, 101,000 proof gallons a day. The team that I work with are probably as passionate about making great whiskey as I am. I just get to go and do fun things like this while they're slaving away. But so this distillate starts out as HH Reg, 70, 10, 12. We ship it to the cistern room in tankers at 140 proof. It comes off the still at 140 proof. We add pure water to it, reverse osmosis water, cut it to 125, put it in the new charred white oak barrels, and put it away in our warehouses. Right now we have 70-something warehouses. It's kind of hard to keep up because we take some of the old ones down and replace them with new ones. We're building new ones about every 4 to 6 months to keep up with the 1,500 barrels a day that we're producing. But some of those are great big brick and concrete buildings in Louisville next to the distillery. Some of those are, you've probably heard of Deatsville. They're small little 6,000 barrel warehouses out in the country, and we've got everything in between. So depending on where these barrels are stored, which house they're in, where in the house, are they up high or are they down low? How long they're in there? Is it a 4-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 17-year-old? Some of this whiskey will taste, it's got 20-year-old whiskey in it. Then what's the batch size, single barrel, just big batch, and finally proof. Those are all the levers that we can pull to turn a style of whiskey into a brand. And again, this one really speaks to Heaven Hill's history, and I'll talk a little bit more about what else is on the label there. But just high quality whiskey at a very reasonable price that is just so delicious to drink. So cheers. A little bit more about what's on this label. I really love that we've got our name big and bold across the front. When I took this job, a lot of friends who had kids in like late high school, early college, and they're like, Heaven Hill, like that crappy vodka we drink? I'm like, no, well, yes, but no. So we've taken the Heaven Hill name off the crap and we're putting on the good stuff now. So now you can go to the liquor store and see Heaven Hill, you know it's good. There's a picture of the original distillery on there, family owned since 1935, and then across the bottom there, this bourbon is 7 years old in red letters. Who else in the business right now can produce something like that? That's bottled and bond, 7 years old, and it's under $50. It speaks to what Heaven Hill does. We did a staff training with our distributor yesterday, and Bernie, my colleague, who some of you saw him yesterday, he's performing downstairs right now. His phrase is, Heaven Hill, for the sales team, is the thing the takeaway, the thing to remember is our whiskeys are longer, stronger, better value. So longer, they're aged longer than the competition, they're stronger, they're usually higher proof, and they're better value. We tend to sell them at ridiculously low prices. So again, that's kind of the one thing to take away from today, is that that's how we play in the market. That's our house style. All right, so back to the history of Heaven Hill. We'll step to the William Heaven Hill. There really was a guy called William Heaven Hill. He was a farmer in Bardstown, and when Earl Beam decided he was going to build his distillery, he built it on the William Heaven Hill farm. And they filled out all the paperwork and applied for a license, and it was going to be Heaven Hill, one word, Springs Distillery. Well, the clerk made a mistake and typed it out as 2 words, Heaven Hill Distillery. And they realized that they went back to the clerk and said, can you fix this, please? And the clerk said, yeah, it's a $25 refiling fee. And $25 in having just invested $20,000 was a lot of money. So they said, you know what? Never mind, we'll leave it as is. So that's where the name came from. But anyway, realistically, who wouldn't want to drink whiskey made on Heaven Hill, right? And actually, William Heaven Hill is buried right behind our bottling house. And on Halloween, we do a ghost tour of the grounds, and you can go visit his grave. This series is brought out. It's only available at the Visitor Center in Kentucky, but it's brought out to honor him. And this is, I think this is the 9th version of it, the 9th edition. Yeah, it is 109 proof. It's aged 15 years, same mash bill. So we've gone up a little in proof, gone way up in age. And this is from a batch of 34 barrels that were aged at what we call one of the flat houses in our Shenley site. Shenley was a distilling company. I don't know when they went out of business, but we bought a warehouse site from them. We still call it Shenley. It's got 4 traditional rick houses that are like 6 stories tall, whatever it is, and then 5 flat houses. They're single story, but the barrels are stacked 6 high. And these come from, this whiskey comes from warehouse LL, which is just the name of that. And it's one of those flat houses. So I don't think I've even tasted this one, so this is kind of a special treat for me too.
How often does that come out of the distillery?
About once a year. All right, rule 1, I'm enjoying drinking this. Yeah. But see, same distillate, but see how different it is from the 7-year-old. So, yes ma'am.
Are the flat houses like Dunnages?
Are the flat houses like Dunnages? No, they do have ricks in them, but there's only 1 floor. And on the regular houses, there's 3 high ricks, and in these flat houses, there's 6 high. So it's like a 2-story warehouse without a 2nd floor. Got it. Good question. So again, this whiskey, clearly it tastes a little bit older. There's more of that oak character coming through. But again, it is just smooth, rich, delicious. You know, plenty of those, the honey, vanilla, caramel notes are a little kind of more mature, maybe kind of more creme brulee. See, you can go down all kinds of rabbit holes with these adjectives here, but you know how it goes. And actually, the brand team sent me samples to write tasting notes on these things. And one of the hardest ones is color. They wanted me to describe the color. I was like, it's whiskey colored. Yeah. What is it? Auburn, burnished copper? I don't know. You know. I need to just have that like a wheel like spin that's got all the words on it. Yeah?
Honey-soaked apricots.
Yeah, exactly. And the complexity of that is just delicious. It's so good. So how do we get from a distillery in Bardstown to a distillery in Louisville? November '96, one of the warehouses in Bardstown was struck by lightning. Set it on fire and ultimately set 7 warehouses, 100,000 barrels, and the distillery on fire. When you get a chance, Google distillery fire, and before you've typed in fire, pictures from our fire will start coming up, and it was apocalyptic. 300-foot flames. You could see the glow from Louisville, which is 45 miles away. And basically the firefighters, they stood back and tried to contain it. There was no way to put it out. Luckily / amazingly, no one was injured, no one was killed. My colleague Jody Filiatru, who if you ever get to go to the Evan Williams Bourbon Experience on Main Street in Louisville, he is the artisanal distiller there. He was a warehouse supervisor there in the day, and the biggest damage was some of the plastic on the side of his truck got melted. But he tells hair-raising stories of it was November 6th, '96, I believe. But pretty hair-raising. But again, no one was injured, no one was killed. Next day, Max Shapiro got the crew together and said, we have orders to ship, we have cases to fill, everyone get back to work. and nobody lost their job. The distillery crews were absorbed into warehouse crews, not the bottling line. Well, Heaven Hill figured out what to do, and beautiful thing happened, the industry called her out. And interestingly, they say, here's our list of suggestions. If you don't do them, your premium will go way up, and if you do them, your premium's still going to go up. Yeah. We all know how insurance works, right? All right, I'm going to keep sipping on this William Heaven Hill here. 109 proof, it's so delicious. Great.
Is that a specialty insurance, like companies that only do distilleries and things?
No, so the FM Global, they're a huge, FM approved, anything you get that's got the little stamp on it, they're part of them. But they have, I don't know if they're the distillery division, but they've got the team that we work with know distilleries pretty well. And they're good to work with, I'll be honest, they're very good to work with. So where are we in the story? So that was, 96 through the early 2000s. In 98, we bought the Bernheim distillery from United Distillers. United Distillers was busy becoming Diageo, and Diageo were busy getting out of the American whiskey business. So they sold us the Bernheim distillery in Louisville. It was about a fourth of the capacity that it currently is at the time. And the 7 warehouses that have 420,000 barrels in them that are on site there. They didn't want them. Max didn't really want them. He already had tons of warehouses. Hell, 7 of them had burned down. So they kind of threw the warehouses in with the deal, and that's when we got the Old Fitz brand. Old Fitz started with Stitzel Weller, changed hands a few times, and we've had it since we purchased the Bernheim distillery in '99. Bernheim was a real person. There's a guy called Isaac Wolf Bernheim. He was a German immigrant, and he ended up in Owensboro, Kentucky, and had lots of businesses, one of which was distilling, and he ended up with the Bernheim distillery at 17th and Breckenridge. I'm not sure if it was 17th and Breckenridge then, but he ended up with the distillery, and he wanted to bring out a brand, but he didn't want to put the Bernheim name on it because it was right around World War I, and there was a lot of anti-German and a lot of anti-Semitic sentiment. So he put his name Harper, or his buddy's name Harper on it. So it's his initials, I.W. Harper. You don't know that brand? So that's a Diageo brand. They don't want to give it to us now, but that's it's kind of cool the way these stories interweave with each other. But if you're ever in Louisville and visiting Bardstown, you'll drive right past the Bernheim Arboretum, named after the same guy. It's a beautiful place. It's a huge forest. It's great hiking and trails in there. I'd recommend it strongly. So that was 99 when we purchased the Bernheim distillery, and we have been adding on to it ever since. The last edition was in 2017. We added the last 4 fermenters and the 3rd still. And then when I joined in 2019, a lot of what I've been working on with the team is to increase reliability, productivity, and quality, consistency. I'm a chemical engineer first, and got into this business second. But all those things, they kind of resonate with an engineer, making the place run better, And we took it from about 1,300 barrels a day to 1,500 barrels a day, and we've improved safety, and we've improved quality and consistency and all that. So really proud of all that work we've done. But as I mentioned earlier, we made 440,000 barrels, 441,000 and change barrels last year. It turns out it's not enough. Exactly. So we are currently building a new distillery down in Bardstown. It's going to be called Heaven Hill Springs in honor of the first one. So the first one was Old Heaven Hill Springs. This is not New Heaven Hill Springs, it's just Heaven Hill Springs. We broke ground on it the summer of 22, and we will start up late this year. Phase 1 is 150,000 barrels a year, and we've built it and laid it out so we can have 2 more phases, each of 150,000. So when Springs Phase 3 is built out, we'll make 450,000 barrels a year there. We'll have similar capacity at Bernheim, total capacity of 900,000 barrels a year. It's kind of mind-boggling. That's your part. You've got to keep buying and drinking our whiskeys, right? That's your part in this deal. So yes, will I be overseeing both? I will be overseeing both. So we have a manager, Steve Boone, at Bernheim. There's a manager already hired, but he's a long-term Heaven Hill employee called Adam Gano. He'll manage the operation at Springs, and they'll both report to me. But this has been such a cool project to be part of. And the way it all kicked off, and I talked earlier how cool it was to work for this independent company. Me and the CFO and some other production planners and Alan Latz, who was then Chief Operating Officer, were looking at what sales growth projections are and all that type of stuff and how much whiskey Burnham can make, and realized that, you know, sales were doing this and Burnham was obviously going to flatline at about 450, and shit, we're going to run out of whiskey at some point. And think about this, like our youngest whiskey is pretty much 4 years old. So we're looking at a crystal ball from 4 to 20 years and trying to predict what sales will be. We were making these decisions right as COVID was hitting. Very crystal ball, but we got with Max Shapiro, showed him the numbers. We probably had, I don't know, 7 slides on a PowerPoint. You have to have a PowerPoint for something like that, right? About 20 minutes into the meeting, Max asked all the right questions. He pushes his chair back, goes, I guess we're building a new distillery. End of story. We built a new distillery. So, pretty cool. And it's a $185 million project. So because other companies I've worked for, there's at least 10 layers between you and the person making the decision, and they're all way smarter than you, and their job is to say no, 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 no. So when you talk to the guy, and he pushes his chair back, and look, we're building a new distillery. It's just kind of cool. So how do we design it and build it, and is it going to make exactly the same HA Treg? Answer the second question first. No, it's not going to make exactly the same HA Treg. We could have copied and pasted Burnham from 17th to Breckenridge down to Bardstown, and it wouldn't make the same whiskey. It's not quite terroir, but there's every part of what you do influences how the whiskey comes out. Now, the whiskey made at both distilleries will be very similar, but it'll be quite different. Same way we can put the same distillate in, quote, the same barrels in different houses, or even the same house, and it comes out as, no 2 barrels are identical. So the new distillery will operate differently. It's going to be highly automated. The great thing with starting from literally a green field is you can engineer out all the known issues. Bernheim, the way it was designed and expanded, maybe wasn't the most. You were stuck in a city block, and you got to squeeze this part in here and that part in there, and shoehorn the other thing over there. It doesn't all quite make sense from a production engineering point of view. So at Springs, clean sheet. We're going to do it this way, we're going to do it that way. I want pipes to slope this way, I want the tanks to look like that, they need to be this size. So that was a really fun engineering exercise. Huh?
I said that sounds very similar to the Huntington story.
Yeah, a little bit. But one cool thing that we're doing is live yeast. So, like I mentioned, we use dried yeast. We put 120 pounds of dried yeast into a small tank for every fermenter that we set at Burnham. Small tank with warm water in it, rehydrates it, pump it into the fermenter, it does its magic. Live yeast system, we'll have a yeast lab where we keep 250 ml flasks, happy and healthy. There's a micro lab process called serial subculturing, and we will practice. It's very similar to your sourdough breaker, it's very similar to that. But we will practice serial subculturing in the lab to keep the yeast culture vibrant, happy, healthy. Then we'll go through a small tank called a dona, and from a dona into a yeast tub, and from a yeast tub into a fermenter, and grow it up over. That whole process from the lab into the plant takes about 4 days. So when you're starting up after a shutdown, you've got to start the yeasting process about 4 days before you start anything else. But the reason we're doing live yeast is because, think about it, the yeast makes all the alcohol and a lot of the flavor components. Why wouldn't you want as much control over that as possible? Dry yeast works just fine. All of this was made with dry yeast. It works just fine. But isn't it nice to have control over it and to be able to take it from just fine to a bit better and a bit better and a bit better? And that's why we're doing it. Yes, sir?
Can you speak to add yeast to the process? I mean, how it works?
Sure. So, yeast is the secret ingredient, the black magic, right? We start with grain, and the grain brings starches. And the purpose of milling and mashing is to get access to those starches and then cook them, break them down into fermentable sugars. If you remember your food science, a starch is a big network web, giant molecule of sugars. When we ingest starches, chances are it's been cooked. And then we have digestive systems that break them down into those sugars. Our bodies absorb them, use them for energy. Yeast doesn't have a digestive system like that, so we have to do it for them. So we cook it, and at the end of cooking, by heating it and by the use of malt, which has these naturally occurring enzymes in it, those starches have been broken down to fermentable sugars. And if you really want to geek out, the 3 sugars that yeast can feed on are maltose, glucose, and maltotriose. There will be a test later on. So that's the goal of mashing, is to convert the starches into those 3 sugars. So then you transfer the cooled mash to the fermenter and you add the yeast. And the goal is that you want to keep the yeast happy and healthy. The happier and healthier they are, the more yeast cells they make, and the more yeast cells that are there, the more alcohol they make. And if they're all happy, they make good flavors. And I'm not kidding, stressed yeast make bad flavors, and they don't make as much alcohol. So I was doing a tour at Woodford one time and explained the whole yeasting thing, and it was a bunch of bartenders, and one of the young ladies was like, so around here yeast is queen. I was like, exactly, that's exactly it. So, and it's crazy, I mean, there's not many distillers who really give a shit that much about it. Clearly I do. And again, the reason is, when you have control over it and you can keep the yeast happy and healthy, they pay you back tenfold in better whiskey and more whiskey and all that good stuff. Yes, ma'am.
So if you have too much sugar in ratio to the yeast or too little sugar in ratio to the yeast, does that stress the yeast?
So the question was, if there's too much or too little sugar, does it stress the yeast? If there's too little, yes, because there's not enough. And when they start off, there is an enormous amount of sugar. And they are just basically on a sugar high. So like at Burnham, when we put the 120 pounds of yeast in, it's kind of cool I've not got tired of watching fermenters in all these 20 years, but you fill the fermenter, takes 6 hours to fill, and there's you can maybe see a little bit of activity, like a little bit of fizzy foam on top of it. About 4 hours later, you start to see this foam cap rising. 6 hours into it, that foam cap is starting to collapse, and it looks really cool. And then about 12 hours into it, it looks like it's boiling. It's rocking and rolling. Those yeast cells, because we've done our mashing right, there's tons of food ready for them. It's at the right temperature, it's at the right pH. They're just making babies. The mother cells and daughter cells, they reproduce asexually, so the mother cell gets this bud off the side of it, and that grows into a separate cell. Now you've got 2. Those 2 do the same, now you've got 4, and it keeps on going. So in that 12 to 18 hours after we add the 120 pounds of yeast, they're now up to about 200 million cells per milliliter. And if you do the math on that, it works out about 4,000 to 5,000 pounds. So 120 pounds, yeast, all yeast wants to do is make more yeast cells. And we want more yeast cells to metabolize anaerobically and make alcohol and carbon dioxide. And it's this very symbiotic relation. And actually, it's kind of cool to walk through these giant distilleries and think like, did we harness them or did they harness us? And again, it's just that it's kind of cool to start thinking about this single cell fungus in those terms. But so that's the dry yeast process. You just rehydrate it, pitch it in, it does its thing. The serial self-culturing and the growing it up through a donut and a tub and all that keeps it at that highly active phase where it's budding very actively, and every time you do a transfer, so the donut is 100 gallons, the yeast tub is 1,300 gallons, the fermenter is 80,000 gallons at Springs. So every time you do a transfer, there's all the right food at the right temperature, at the right pH, and they're just like, party's on, and off they go. And actually, we could really go down this rabbit hole. They even do this thing called quorum sensing. So you ask if there's too little sugar. If there's too little yeast, they won't do it. They're like, none of my buddies here. I know it feels good, but no, I don't like this neighborhood. So they'll chemically communicate with each other. There's a great TED talk on this, but that's a whole other subject. But you see how fascinating this is? Anyway, we need to stop and pause for a drink here. I gotta watch the time as well. All right, this is the big dog. So Heaven Hill Heritage Collection, we're about to bring out the 3rd edition of it. This is the 1st edition that we brought out 2 years ago. In those 70-something warehouses, we have 2.1 million barrels aging. They're ranging from distilled yesterday to up to 20 years old. One thing that Heaven Hill does, if you remember I talked about the longer, stronger, better value, we're really good at aging whiskey past kind of the ideal point, if you want to call it that. We've got all these different warehouses we can do cool things with. The sweet spot for bourbon is probably 7 or 8 years to 12-ish years. If you go much beyond 12, you really got to start managing it carefully. Well, this is H.H. Reg again, so same mash bill. It's a mix of 17, 19, and 20-year-old whiskey. I think it's 25, 50, 25, something like that, percent of each of those. So we age stated 17 because the age has to reflect the youngest whiskey in there, but there's 25% 20-year-old in here. So let's take a sip of this and see how it goes. Boom. Man, much spicier. Yeah, spice really comes through on that one. And probably what that is, so the rye, the 10% rye contributes spice notes. Those spice notes also come from the barrel. So that's probably where these are coming, because again, it's the same mash bill as the previous two. And lots of those kind of, aged oak notes as well. But again, no one component is out-competing the others. It's balanced, it's rich. You know you're drinking an old bourbon here. But there are a lot of very expensive whiskeys out there with big fat age statements on them that you spend a shit ton of money on. And to me, they literally taste like a dirty old stick. I like your laugh, thank you. You can come to all my shows. There you go. But this is what Heaven Hill does so well. Actually, the precursor to the Heaven Hill Heritage Collection, which came out right as I was joining the company, was a 27-year-old. And Bernie and I were just talking about this yesterday. To me, it was a very good 27-year-old bourbon. It wasn't that good of a bourbon because it was too old. It had been in the barrel too long, and it was the woody notes that were getting this were really coming through. It was still drinkable. I was like, holy crap, this is 27-year-old. That's really good for a 27-year-old. But like I said, there are a lot of whiskeys out there that have just been in the barrel too long, and whoever was building that brand, I think they didn't select for the good stuff. So the 27-year-old, of the stuff that ended up in the bottle, we probably had, for every barrel that we bottled, we had 2 that we threw away because the whiskey was crap. Yeah, it tasted horrible. It tasted like the dirtiest old stick. So I'm going to go back to this. This is cool. I don't get to drink this stuff that often either. So they don't always give me this stuff. So I'm having a special treat here as well. That's so good. It's always fun to go back. It's always fun to go back to the start and see what the first one tastes like. Yes, sir.
Got a question, going back to Bernheim. I know we had a small batch. You guys came out with the barrel about a year ago.
Right.
Are we going to see age statements? Are we going to see single barrel?
For Bernheim?
Bernheim?
So Bernheim is our wheat whiskey. It's got 51% wheat in the mash bill, and it is the smallest volume that we make at Bernheim. We typically make it a half a day to a day a year, so 2 to 4 fermenters a year. As you said, we've had the 7-year-old small batch out for a decade or more now, and we brought out the barrel proof last year, 2 years ago, whenever it was. We don't have any specific plans for line extensions in that, but one cool thing we've got coming up. So I mentioned the grain to glass. We're always tinkering. Somebody asked me yesterday how many of our barrels are experimental out of the 2.1 million, and we're experimenting with barrel finishes and different mash bills and stuff like that. But one line extension, a series of line extensions we got coming out is grain to glass, and it's focused on sense of place, and we're working very closely with local farmers. Initially, it was Beck's seed company and Bernard Peterson for the corn, and we've actually expanded that into working with Kentucky farmers to grow rye in Kentucky. And the later editions of the more recent production of grain to glass will have Kentucky rye in it. But those three are going to come out this summer. There's a high rye bourbon, a high wheat bourbon, and a high rye. And if you heard my joke yesterday, the way you pronounce that in Kentucky is high rye. And then, so those three will come out this summer, and then I think next year we're going to, what we've done, every time we produce these 3 mash bills, half of the distillate goes in a regular oak barrel, and half it goes in a special barrel. So we've done French oak, Slovakian oak, we've done different species of American white oak. We've done different toasts and chars, and that'll give us kind of some wiggle room to bring out some special editions. That's going to be kind of cool. I mentioned OFD, or wheated bourbon. Mostly that comes out as larceny. We also have Old Fitz. It's the decanter that's impossible to get. But we are bringing out a small batch, Elijah Craig toasted barrel, effectively Elijah Craig single barrel, I guess. Elijah Craig toasted barrel, Heaven Hill 7-year-old, Rittenhouse, and maybe larceny. It must be larceny.
I did a burn house pick with you guys.
Yeah. So it depends how much we've got of whatever we've got. Sometimes, if you come to the visitor center, you can do a you-do bourbon and fill your own bottle, and that's barrel strength. That's where the barrel strength Burnham came from.
There you go.
Was that? So yeah, we're always kind of tinkering around with stuff. But so to have single barrels of Burnham wheat, that's not. I don't make those decisions. I just But I don't know if that's on the list right now. So yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah.
So I didn't really talk about, I guess, Reg. So changing different mash bills. If you're gonna have a yeast lab,
Yeah.
will you? I mean, are they even already trying different yeasts for the same mash?
No, we're going to stick with the Heaven Hill yeast strain. At Brown Forman, we had a Woodford yeast, Early Times yeast, Old Forest yeast, and Jack Daniel's yeast. And each mash bill got its own yeast strain, and they do produce different. It's not just the yeast isn't just absorbing sugars and producing alcohol and carbon dioxide. It's a really complex biochemistry going on, and depending on the DNA of whatever specific yeast strain it is, they will produce different flavors. So, you'll hear people talk about that's got to be Woodford. It's got the banana note, and sometimes you walk in the fermenter room at Woodford and it smells like bananas because the yeast happens to produce a lot of that ester. We like the flavor profile that our yeast produces, and people talk about like a peanut or an almond note on Heaven Hill whiskey. Some of that comes from the yeast, so it's part of the whole DNA. And if you bring in a different yeast culture, the chances of contaminating what it is, it's a low thing, but we like her yeast. She's our queen. She does great, so we're gonna stick with her. Ed, did you have a question?
Yeah, so would that be an Old Fitz?
Yeah.
So I've heard talk of the bottled and bond becoming part of the main line.
Right.
So the canners, when they started, they were supposed to be for 3 years, spring and fall, but then they got added on the distillery releases.
Right.
It became 3 years, so they give people ulcers trying to get them. So is that going to be the end of the decanters when it becomes part of the main line?
So the question was about the decanters. Are we going to finish the end of the decanter line? Short answer, no. But the bigger question there is, it was scheduled to be ended, and I did a tasting down at the Heaven Hill Bourbon Experience, and like, this is the last one you'll be able to taste. We're discontinuing it. Well, then Max Shapiro heard that we were getting ready to discontinue that, and he said, I like that product. Don't discontinue it. So we're not discontinuing it. Yes, sir.
Do you have any blending responsibilities or tasting responsibilities or batch approval when you do blends?
So the question is, do I have any blending or batching responsibilities? That's a very collaborative process. We have a team called the innovation team that in street speak is day drinking. So we meet monthly, and we might have 10 different things to taste, and they're just like A through M or whatever it is. And they'll give us some clues to what it is, and we're doing things like try to pick the next Parker's or the next Heritage Collection or the next Old Fitz or whatever it might be. Or here's an experimental barrel finish that we tried. What do we think? And it's very collaborative. So I don't wade in there and go, by God, it's got to be this. Now we do have, for like the barrel proofs, we have a woman called Tawny Goatee on our QC team. Tawny is this finely tuned machine. She could literally pick up a barrel sample and go, that's good enough to be barrel proof without ever having tasted. She knows our stuff. She couldn't go and take that skill anywhere else because she's tuned in to our flavor profiles, and she knows it. So on some of the stuff, she does a lot of the Henry McKenna single barrel things. And it's like, yes, no, yes. Yeah, there was a question in the back. Just a second. Yes, sir.
I have a question on that.
We're big Heaven Hill fans in this room. I was wondering if there's any plans to return fighting cock to glory.
I don't know. I'm not involved in those, but it is kind of cool, isn't it?
I love whiskey drinking women. They understand the things I do. They never beg me to stop drinking, 'cause they like drinking whiskey too.